I'm at the Mission Control Center of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, part of NASA, the place from where all the Mars missions are controlled by NASA. And I have with me Dr. Bob Balaram, very famous for having the credit for being the only person in the world to have ever flown a helicopter in an extraterrestrial location. The name of the helicopter, Ingenuity, and it is still flying on Mars. Dr. Bob, thanks a lot for finding time with me. And let's begin with Madras to Mars, because
Yes.
you studied at the Indian Institute of Technology, Mars. And let's come straight first to Ingenuity. What is special about the helicopter which you made?
I think the main thing is it really opens up a new dimension to how we explore Mars. We have had landers, we have had rovers, which can go to some places, but not everywhere. But an aerial vehicle can go everywhere on Mars. And so for the first time, I think you have the capability to explore the entire planet, whose land area, in some sense, is equivalent to the land area of Earth. So there's a lot of places to explore. It cannot carry, obviously, the huge amount of science instruments with a rover could, but there's a lot of miniaturization going on. So even if future helicopters only carry 5 kilograms of science, you can still do a lot of science in 5 kilograms of science instruments. So it's really opened up that aerial dimension. And that's the sort of the practical side. There's a symbolic thing too. I think it's good to think that not very long after, in historical terms, after the Wright brothers did their first flight, controlled flight in Kitty Hawk, we have been able to do something similar on another planet. Is kind of symbolically, I think, tells.
And your T-shirt says exactly
Yes, my daughter
that.
got me this T-shirt. She found somebody selling it in Northern California where she lives, and so there it is. Yeah.
What a proud moment.
Yeah. Thank you.
So tell me, how difficult was it to configure the helicopter Ingenuity?
See, the main difficulty was it was something that nobody had done before. Even the chief engineer of the JPL thought it was not possible. But technology in terms of miniaturization, stuff like your cell phones, the processors, the sensors, and the batteries and things like that, finally made it possible. But still, it was something that there's no book saying this is how you design a Mars helicopter. Even during the process of the design of the aerodynamics, of how it would fly, our helicopter experts in NASA found a number of surprises. Helicopters on Mars behave different from aerodynamics and physics perspective compared to Earth. And it not only, so we had to survive the challenge of flying in an atmosphere that is only 1% of the density of Earth. So it's very tough to fly.
You need the lift which comes with the thick atmosphere.
Air. So you got to spin the blades very fast. The blades are specially designed for the thin air. But in addition to sort of the aircraft challenge of it, if you will, the fact that it also had to be a spacecraft. It's not only an aircraft, but it's a spacecraft. So it had to survive the rigors of launch. It has to survive entry, descent, and landing, shock loads. It has to survive radiation. It has to survive the very cold temperatures at night. And third leg, which in some sense was probably the most challenging, was how do you test something like this?
Absolutely.
Because first of all, you had to invent a completely new test program, because there's no test program that said this is how you test a helicopter for space. In Earth, you just take it outside. You can do your tests. Here, we had to test it in a big vacuum chamber that we filled up with carbon dioxide gas to mimic the Mars atmosphere. But that entire test campaign to prove, because it wasn't guaranteed that, just because you say you're going to design one, they're going to let you take this helicopter on a flagship mission. Sure. We were like stowaway passengers on a flagship mission. And if we had made the slightest mistake, we could have jeopardized the primary mission, which is the rover Perseverance, that is trying to get all these samples to find signs of past life on Mars. So we had to prove ourselves to be extremely safe. We had to be extremely clean, because after all, this is, a mission that is looking for past life. We don't want to contaminate anything. So there's just the newness of it, the fact that there are a lot of skeptics, the fact that funding was up and down and up and down. Nothing was, given right in the beginning. We had to sort of struggle for every bit of funding. So a lot of things had to come together. I had the benefit of being with a very good team. And my project manager, Mimi Ong, she was fantastic in overcoming all the programmatic and political obstacles, which let me focus on the technical side of things. And together, I think we pulled it off. And what do you know? We're still flying. We just 64 flights and still going. So
it wasn't expected to last this long. So it must be a great feeling.
Yes, I think we were given 30 days, 30 Martian days, which is almost the same as 30 Earth days to get done with our experiment and get out of the way. We have a technology demonstration, yes. You'll show that you can fly in that Martian atmosphere, but then maybe up to 5 flights in those 30 days. 3 we had planned, 2 contingency flights, totally 5. But it kept flying, and so the NASA at that point was wise enough to say, hey, maybe we should continue this to see how it might be used as a scout for Perseverance rover. So we did a whole bunch of scouting, and more recently, we have also been a bit of a technology test bed. We've been trying out new things related to flying, related to autonomy. So those are the kinds of things that we've been doing more recently. We designed only for those 30 days, which was in the Martian spring, which is nice and sunny. Yes. And we hit our first winter, and we thought we would die in the first winter, but we survived the winter also. And now we're, it's been 2 years and more on Mars, and it's doing very well.
So how was your journey like from Madras to Mars? Tell me a little bit about your early childhood and then your days at the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, and we'll come once back to Ingenuity.
Right. So my dad was in the Air Force, so he was moving all over the place. I ended up in a school in near Madanpalli, Andhra Pradesh, called Rishi Valley School. I ended up there for my final few years in high school. Then I went to IIT Madras. I wanted to always go with NASA. When I was a young kid, my uncle would bring back all these things about NASA, so that was my dream. And so I came to do my PhD in the States, and then I came to JPL after finishing my PhD. I worked on a number of research type projects related to rovers, even some early balloon works for Venus, and then finally I also did a lot of things related to simulation of entry, descent, and landing. Did a lot of things related to that. And then I had been toying with this idea of a helicopter for many, many years, actually back in the 1990s. 1990s, there were people thinking about it, not just me. And at one point in 2013, the JPL director, he had heard about all these drones and things, and he came back and he said, can we do this on Mars? And somebody remembered that I had been dabbling a little bit, in the 1990s, and they said, let's get Balaram to give you a briefing. And I gave a briefing. He gave a little bit of study money, and that's how it all started off. And then, here we are.
So a dream, then getting a little money and getting the project off the ground. It took many years.
Yes. And in fact, it was, as I said, it was all in fits and starts. We would get some money, we would make some progress, and then the JPL leadership would try to find the money, to do the next phase of things. So we had a lot of critical milestones in terms of demonstrating systems, and once we demonstrated something, they said, okay, we'll give you money for the next step. So it was a tortuous money path, let's put it that way.
Getting the money anywhere is tough, and in these hard days for NASA must have been particularly tough.
Yes, and plus it was very unconventional. Right? It was not like a standard thing that you can allocate something easily. People had to be convinced every step of the way that it was worth it continuing to invest in it.
Sure. Now, did your training at IIT Madras as a mechanical engineer come in of any use when you were doing?
Invaluable. I mean, I think one of the nice things about the IIT Madras training is at that time it was all set up with German collaboration. And the Germans believed very strongly that you have to work with your hands to establish that hand-mind connection. It's something that kids in America grow up with automatically because they help their father in the garage with some tools and machine tools. But in India, we think academics is all about mind. But appreciating a lot of the mechanical engineering processes and actually like physically having worked all of them, at IIT Madras, gave me that insight so that when it came to things mechanical, especially, with the helicopter, I had the insight. I could dialogue with the expert and say, well,
Let's get your hands out. And how good was the training at Madras? Show your hands to the people. They need to see your hands, which gave India Bob Balaram and then gave NASA Bob Balaram, who took all the way to Mars.
So it was that very comprehensive training. We covered everything in physics, all aspects of mechanical engineering, not just mechanical, electrical, electronics. Very comprehensive 5-year undergraduate degree. And then after I came here, I got a lot of experience in things like computer vision and big software systems and rovers and things like that, autonomy. So it was kind of like I had a big palette of tools, and I wasn't necessarily the expert in any one of them, but I knew enough to be dangerous and to ask the right questions and know if the particular person I was dialoguing with and talking to, I could probe and challenge. And that was key, I think, to getting a good design going. So it wasn't just, get a bunch of experts and tell them. I was able to have that back and forth, which was needed because it wasn't always clear what is the right solution for any particular problem.
Now, when you designed it, how difficult were getting the blades right? Because you need to spin them in that very thin atmosphere and spin them very fast. And how difficult was that?
We're very lucky because there is a company here in the Southern California area called AeroVironment, which builds drones, as their main product, high-end drones. And so they have experience with aerodynamics and blades, not on Mars, but they have flown some aircraft, propeller-driven aircraft at 98,000 feet. Some of the highest propeller flying spacecraft. They have designed and worked with them. So they are very used to building for that aerodynamic regime. And they're also very good at things like building extremely lightweight composite structures. So the blade is, this beautiful, each blade is just 28 grams.
Wow.
So it's just
the whole thing is less than 2 kilos.
Yes, 1.8 kilograms. So every step of the way, we had to keep the mass down. So we were very lucky to have that partnership in terms of building the blades. And then we were also able to tap into the deep expertise in helicopters that's there at the NASA Ames Research Center in near San Francisco. That's where the helicopter experts are. So between the folks at AeroVironment and the NASA experts at NASA Ames, we were able to get a very good aerodynamic design that allowed us to fly.
What was your feeling when the first test flight happened on Mars?
It was good, but that was not my most intense day.
Okay.
My most intense moment was the day we got dropped off from the rover onto the surface. It was critical because then we were completely on our own. Up till then, we were surviving through power and energy.
You were tethered.
We were tethered. We got the energy from the rover. But this was the first time we would be on our own and we would have to survive the night. And the thermal models that told us how cold we would get was not very reliable because we really didn't know exactly what environment we would face in terms of things like winds and things like that. So that was the night me and my thermal engineer, we sweated because we just didn't know whether we would wake up. The rover would depart, they would drop us and then move back a little bit, and would we even get on the radio and talk, or would we just die overnight? So once that was fine, and we had a small glitch related to some startup sequence that we were able to overcome. But once that we survived that first night, the flying was the easy part because we had done so much testing on that. I was not at all in any surprise that it would fly. But surviving that first night was my biggest worry.
And then subsequently, there are no scientific payloads on the Ingenuity
Correct.
helicopter. So what did you manage to achieve any scientific goals?
Yes.
Because it was not planned, but then as a bonus, did you manage to
Yes.
do something?
So in fact, it's funny. We were put on the rover. We were treated like yet another instrument. We were treated like yet another instrument in terms of the accommodation, the electrical interfaces, and things like that. But the scientists really didn't want us there because we were not a bona fide science instrument. We were just, this sort of people trying to hitchhike to Mars.
Like you said, a stowaway.
Stowaways, yes. So, in fact, at one time, my project manager, Mimi Yong, said we shouldn't even have a color camera on the helicopter because then the scientists will say, oh, look, you're trying to do color imaging and science, and you're not a science instrument. You should, be a tech. So we managed to work around my project manager and put, a color camera on it. So with that color camera, we have done a lot of forward scouting for the rover so that the rover scientists could say, hey, maybe we want to go there or not, depending on what the helicopter has seen. Similarly, all the rover planners, when they plan the routes, sometimes they use our images to help them plan a better route around. There's been good work related to how sound propagates in the Martian atmosphere.
First sound recording came
Sound recording came, and that led to some slight surprises in the way sound propagates on Mars. That was some unexpected bonus science. There's been some good science on how dust, because we effectively are a controlled dust devil, right? So that allowed scientists to, sort of indirectly back out, what kind of dust and what their properties are. So that's been something interesting. More recently, we just ran an experiment where we flew to different heights and keeping still with respect to the ground. And depending upon how much control effort it requires to stay still at a particular height, that tells you something about the wind. Because if the wind is blowing from one side, you have to make a control effort to sort of fight the wind and stay in the same place. So we recently did an experiment to see whether we could back out winds, which is there's not much data on how winds behave that low in the what they call the boundary layer of Mars. So there is that we have to see whether that's good data there or not. So there's been some indirect science that has come out, out of this that's unexpected. But people have been, quite pleased with some of these side benefits, even though it wasn't meant to be, anyway a science platform.
It took some of the cake from the rover because you became the face of that particular mission. I can say far away in India, people were talking more about the helicopter than about the rover, even though I understand the rover is a supreme scientific instrument on Mars.
Well, I think, we were something new and it came at a difficult time for not only the US, but I think the whole world was going through pandemic and the fact that we all got through. So it was very relatable that this small little thing is, flying and kind of made people feel good. But, I must give credit to the entire rover team because not only did they give us the time, even though there was some initial resistance from scientists to take us on and so forth, but once we were on board, we got absolutely all the help we needed in terms of getting accommodated on the rover and supporting us during those first 30 days. And even afterwards, we've been, getting good support from them. So in that sense, they have a much larger mission, a much more, important mission. But at some level, it's a more long-term thing and it's more, conventional in some sense, right? So this was new, so we got a bit of good press from that, yes.
Certainly. NASA could do well with some press. It's a very important organization for the world, and getting some quality press coming out of Ingenuity was a very
Yes.
happy fact.
Yes,
now,
definitely.
what is next for? Is there more helicopters likely? What can we expect more?
Ingenuity itself can keep flying. We are right now in the stage where funding, I think, will probably be the main constraint as to how long we'll be allowed to fly. We have been surviving on, extra funding that was not planned for. Obviously, they'd only planned money for the first 30 days, and that was it. So at some point, funding may become a constraint, but we can also, have a bad day and crash or land, or some little part can break off in the night, because of the thermal effects. So Ingenuity itself can contribute a lot more. How much longer remains to be seen. As I said, it depends on other things. There are two other helicopters that have been designed with arms to pick up sample tubes. And the idea is that they would be a backup to the sample return campaign. And those are in the early design phases. But there also, the whole sample return architecture in its entirety is turning out to be extremely expensive and very difficult. There was a recent independent review board that made that thing clear that as currently planned, the money was going to be too much to do that entire thing. So in the process of trying to fix that architecture to make it cheaper and more financially possible, I don't know if the helicopters will be manifested there or not. So it all depends upon how things go on those two areas. We have plans on paper for what we were calling right now as a Mars science helicopter, which would be maybe a 30-kilogram helicopter with maybe 5 kilograms of science on it. And so maybe sometime in the 2030s, something like that would also be designed and sent. It all remains to be seen, but we have established the precedent. We have a lot of very good data to validate all our design tools and models. So we're in good shape to do further Mars aerial exploration right now.
See, India also did a mission to Mars, which was successful, Mangalyaan.
Yes.
And recently we had the soft landing nearer the South Pole with Chandrayaan-3. What was your feeling when India reached the orbit of Mars in the maiden attempt and then finally also had a successful soft landing nearer to the South Pole of the Moon, which is the gold rush moment for that?
Yeah, no, I think it is tremendous how much ISRO has, done. It's been fantastic. And as with any of these things, you can read about somebody landing somewhere and you say, oh yeah, that's, science technology, they can land. But unless you actually go through the process and learn within your own organization how to do it. So the fact that India is getting that experience base means that the doors are wide open. India can go anywhere. It's only a matter of national will and resources. And the resources India has shown that it doesn't need a whole lot of resources to do some very interesting things. And sometimes people say like, why is India doing Mars or Venus or the sun? But why don't you spend that money somewhere else in India? But my answer is not everybody can do agriculture or medical research. You have different people in the country, and some people's minds are tuned and fine for doing something like, complex engineering tasks, complex space things. And having something like all these ISRO programs gives those kids something to aspire to, right? Now, if not everybody can go and do the exact same thing, in India, working on some things. So that should be done too. And so in India, I think is seeing the benefits of the better economy and things where we can now invest in a lot of things and invest in all our people. Sure. So as the kids who want to do space can do space. The kids who want to do advanced medicine or want to do new vaccines, they can do new vaccines. The kids who want to do new seeds and farming, they can do that, or set up industries or things. So I think India that way can blossom in a number of areas. And so I think ISRO has been very good at retaining that spirit, which in some sense is very reminiscent of what NASA was like, in the 60s and 70s. You can do, we will do. And so I take my hats off to ISRO for leading that path.
Sure. I hope you've heard Prime Minister Narendra Modi has given new tasks to ISRO, which is to set up a space station by 2035 and have an Indian on the surface of the moon by 2040. These are challenges which the Prime Minister has thrown, and a Prime Minister who puts the money behind these missions also, because he puts...
And the technology is evolving so fast that it doesn't have to be done like the Apollo program, which in those days was a fantastic achievement, but it took a lot of resources. Now with all the new things that are there, materials, processors, and all these things, there's no reason why it cannot be done at much more reasonable price levels. And I think it's very important to have aspirational goals, because that's what I think a great civilization, strives for. It doesn't sit just there, on its back and just say, oh, chalta hai or something. It has to really be striving forward. So I really like that.
True. And also, ISRO manages to do things almost 10 times cheaper than the European Space Agency and the NASA. So that also gives them a certain advantage. And now both India and America are partnering very heavily, especially after India signed up on the Artemis program. So the opportunity, do you see a big opportunity between India and America as friends?
I think there will be specific places like Artemis where there is a role in which India will play, in some sense, a junior partner. But I think regarding everything else, I think India can be on its own, doing its thing. So I think it's a great nation, should be doing great things. So this is all part of that story. So I fully think it'll be all of that. You'll be part of it in Artemis with other people. It'll be independent and on its own, thinking about its own things. So I think you'll see a mix of all of that.
Bob, you're still an Indian citizen.
Yes.
At some point, do you want to come back and maybe work with the Indian space ecosystem? Because now no longer is ISRO the only player. It's now an ecosystem. Do you think that's an opportunity for you?
Well, what I have been thinking of is, there is a certain lessons that I've learned in the process of building Ingenuity. Specifically, how do you build something that was never thought of before? How do you go about thinking about it? What are the challenges you face? And how do you approach these problems? So these are lessons that I think can be very useful for undergraduate students, for graduate students, and even for high schoolers to sort of, how do you think about things when there is no textbook, So I have been thinking seriously about, essentially like starting off what I would call as some educational type of things, where it could be talks, it could be lesson modules, it could be a seminar series, it could be a workshop, it may even be a semester-long course. And that's the kind of stuff that I can see being useful for students, not only in the States, but also in India. And in fact, one of the things I was trying to see is whether with the Indian...
You're going out of the frame, sir.
With the Indian, I'll be visiting India in January, and I'll be seeing whether there are some potential opportunities to sort of go more in the education side. I am not at a stage where I want to intensely work on, a project with very demanding deadlines. And there was an entire year where every weekend we were working. There's no weekend for an entire year. We were testing, and the test time on the chamber was precious. So chamber was available, you tested on weekends. So for a whole year, we did things like that. I can't do that anymore. But I think in terms of maybe inspiring and helping the next generation of kids everywhere to do great things, that I think is something that I'd be very interested in.
You are a role model, and I'm sure IIT Madras or the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, or other institution would be more than happy.
Yeah, I will definitely be going back. I was there in IIT Madras a few months ago, and I got to interact with a lot of the kids there, gave some talks, and got to see a lot of their projects. So I'm definitely going to follow up there with IIT Madras. I would also like to follow up with Mr. Somnath to see, he was here very kindly. Had a chance to meet him a few months ago when he came for the NISAR hardware delivery. So I'm hoping to see if I can, get in touch with some of these folks and see what we can do in the education area. Because at the end of the day, there are 100,000 kids in India who are smarter than me. They just need the opportunity to do things.
Outreach and reaching the masses is my business, and I have been actively doing that for a long time. So I'm looking forward to that interaction. Now, towards the end, do you think at some point humanity would have sustained presence on Mars? And I'm not talking of moon to you, I'm talking Mars, because that is your big area of work.
See, one of the realizations I had with Ingenuity, it's nothing, not my own realization, it's a well-known thing, is the only way you can predict the future is to actually try to create it. Take some different technology area like all this chat GPT and, large language models. Who last year would you have even thought of something like this? So these things come about because somebody made it happen. There's nothing inevitable about any of this. So when we say, human presence and sorts of things, it's going to happen because somebody made it happen. So that's the only way you can predict the future, is to actually create it. So yeah, this technically, it's all feasible. It's all a question of, as I said, will and interest, and so I don't want to predict anything because it all up to the particular person and or teams that will make it happen. So or countries that want to do it will make it happen.
So we saw India and America, whenever they have collaborated, the world's oldest democracy and the world's largest democracy. The first rockets which India launched, Nike Apache, came from America. Then we saw in Chandrayaan-1 when they worked together.
The
then the M-Cube, which gave us the presence of water.
Yes.
So, and now we have NISAR, which is the world's single most expensive civilian Earth imaging satellite. Do you think at some point India and America should look at a joint mission to explore Mars?
It's too early to tell. I think, the American human program has its challenges. So I think they're hoping to take their first steps to go back to the moon. Let's see how all of that progresses and how Artemis evolves. Everything's possible, but at this stage of the game, I think India is on its own path, and it's on a good path. So as long as it's in good hands with ISRO, a lot of private companies now. I think I heard there were some 300 startups.
Plus.
Yeah, startups in the space business now. I think we should just let it blossom and see what happens.
Any message for very young kids who want to take on space as a career?
I think definitely the Indian environment for space research is fantastic right now. It was probably somewhat more limited when I left the country, and I had my heart set on NASA just back then. So that was, but now I think if you're a kid in India, whether you want to do medical stuff or new drugs, or you want to do the next thing in AI or space exploration or start a business, the world is your oyster, as they say. So yes, they should all go forth and do what they want to do. And the only way you will find out whether you're successful is to try.
Thanks a lot for speaking to
Thank
me,
you.
Bob. What
Thank
a
you.
pleasure. And finally meeting you in person and understanding the complexities of Ingenuity, and also understanding how difficult it is to get something a dream which you had, and have the Wright brothers moment on Mars. What a lovely feeling. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
So that was Dr. Bob Balaram, the person who designed Ingenuity, the helicopter which is flying on Mars. What a great feeling. What a great achievement. A Wright brothers moment on planet Mars. Madras to Mars. That is what Dr. Bob signifies. And we come to you from the Mission Control Center of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, part of NASA at Pasadena. From JPL, Pallav Bagla for NDTV.